G'day everybody, how you going today? It is so good to see you. I am sitting in a hot warehouse, which is why the fan there, which you can just see over my right shoulder, is blowing. Now I'm wondering how good the AI noise reduction is in Final Cut Pro. You might have noticed we've got Final Cut Pro 11. I think it's taken 10 or 15 years for them to go from version 10 to 11. It's a very long time, but a few years ago, they gave us AI noise reduction. It's pretty impressive. I use it in almost every video these days. We're here to talk about drills, pens, and lenses. Yes, we've got a new lens from Pergear. It is a 100mm, fully manual, 2x macro. How awesome's that? And yes, fully manual, which means you need to focus, which is kind of a good thing, I reckon, with a macro lens. And you certainly need to keep track of your apertures if you want to know what they are, because there is absolutely no information coming from this lens to the camera. None at all. Not a thing. To the point where you actually have to say this is a non-CPU lens. You have to tell the camera how many millimeters the lens is and what the f-stops are in order for the in-body image stabilization to work correctly, the IBIS. It's quite interesting working with a lens like this. I have spent a little bit of time shooting non-macro. I'm always interested in what a lens can do outside of its standard usage. And we've seen, for example, with the Nikon macro, which is obviously something like 3 times the price of this lens, and it is not a 2-to-1 macro. I think it's just a 1-to-1 macro. I'll have to double check that. I'll write it on the screen right there. It's got autofocus, stabilization. It's got lots of cool things. And with a lens like the Nikon 105, yeah, it's a macro, but it's an absolutely awesome 105mm lens, which you can use for cityscape, landscape, product, portraiture. You can use it for all sorts of things. I'm a massive advocate that lenses can be used for more than their designated, in inverted commas, use case, because they absolutely can. But I've used this lens a little bit, and what I'll do is I'll move my Makita. My Makita is here for a reason. We want to see the lens. That's what we're here for, isn't it? This is my Z7 with the extra eyepiece on it. We're shooting at f2.2 on the 50mm 1.2. Honestly, the most gorgeous cinematic look, and I get so pumped. It's kind of been the juice of my life if I can make images look cinematic. And as Joe often says to me, if you've got the 85mm or the Planner or this lens, he says, it's like cheating because it just makes everything look good. It's true. I mean, you still need to be able to frame a shot and see light. These are very cinematic lenses. The 50 1.2, the 85 1.2, the 135 1.8 Planner, extraordinarily cinematic lenses. Such a pleasure to use. And even in a situation like this, you know, this is really what it looks like, but it's just kind of got that pop. What we have here is the Pergear 100mm f2.8 macro, and we've got it sitting on the Z7, because I kind of thought this is an affordable macro lens, and maybe if you're a macro photographer, the sort of camera you might get is something like, because this is a native Z mount lens, you might get something like a Z7. It kind of makes a lot of sense. You've got the most pixels that Nikon can provide. You've got one of their very best sensors in the Z range. And the only sensor that is better than this one by a hair, and whether it's better in resolution, I doubt it. I think we're talking more about dynamic range. And because it's a hair, like we're talking like I think it's something like 1/10 of a stop. So a Z7 or a Z7II, but a Z7 is the most affordable way you can get the most resolution on the Z mount. How cool's that? Most pixels, you know, resolution, pixels. That's how you do it. So that's what I thought I would try. And I always try a lens in the field. How does it work in the field? Because sometimes a macro lens, can do more than one thing. It can be a macro lens, but you can use it in the field for all sorts of other things. That is not really the case with this lens. Ergonomically, it's designed to be a macro lens. The throw of the focus ring is very long, and it's absolutely weighted for the macro end. And then right at the very end, just a very small component of it is everything else. Focusing manually, I was trying to focus on a pier, and you'll see these shots. I got some lovely shots, actually. I was surprised. Very hard, because the amount of movement in the focusing ring here had to be minute, and it changed a huge amount. And here we are at f2.8, 1,2,500, we've got a 1/4000 handheld on the Z7. We're shooting with the 100mm f2.8, 1/4000th frame rate, and focus is extremely difficult. The slightest, like I might be moving that about a millimeter. All of the focus is down the other end for macro photography, which of course makes complete sense for a macro lens. Further to that, it seems if we go to infinity, there's infinity somewhere there, I can go past infinity. That's past infinity. So yes, you can use this lens for that sort of thing. You can. It's possible. Why not? Live the dream. But it ergonomically is not designed for that. The function of the ring is designed for macro. And when you're shooting macro, that extraordinarily slow throw is brilliant, because that's where you need it when you've got a 2x macro lens. Now, 1:1 means you can get as close as the size of your sensor. 2x means you can get twice as close as the size of your sensor. Or to put it another way, half the size of your sensor diagonally fills the frame. And that's pretty close. You're getting pretty close to things at that point in time. And when you're shooting at 45.7 megapixels, it's a lot, because you can obviously crop into that a fair bit and still have a lot of pixels. So I wouldn't say this lens is a general all-rounder 100mm lens. You don't have autofocus. The manual focus is difficult outside of macro. It is difficult. I would call it difficult. And the focus ring is slow and quite stiff, as is the aperture ring, which is also clickless, which is kind of cool. It's smooth, so you can kind of dial up anywhere. You might be at 5.6 and a bit, or 2.8 and a quarter. So it's really aimed and designed for macro. Usually in macro, you want as much depth of field as possible, and you might end up doing focus stacking anyway. I'm sure a lot of people do. That's how they do it. One thing I need to say here is I'm not a macro photography specialist. I don't know all the terminology. I don't know all the ways that photographers work, and I'm just going to do my best in regards to just showing you really how sharp is this lens just with everyday objects. That's all I can do. I think macro photography is a very beautiful and specific discipline. Not only does it require getting down and very close to objects, but your lighting is also very specific. And if you're photographing insects or very small animals, just really anything small, you've also got to have the patience and the understanding of how those critters or whatever that you're shooting functions and works. None of that is my core skill set. What I'm hoping to show you here is whether you think this lens is good enough for you for the price that it's at. If I go to the metadata, all it's going to show is that we shot on the Z7. There you can see its resolution. That's the Z7, and we have no information about the lens. I think this is actually really, really sharp. And we're at f4, pixel for pixel. This is our raw file. This is how it's delivered to us. I think that's a really, really nice result. I don't see any aberrating. It's not a particularly harsh, but there could potentially be aberrating. And even when we look out here, we get a very, very small amount of something going on here, but it's very minor. And I actually love how ridiculously smooth that fall off is. So even so, this lens is hard to use as a landscape lens. And it is. It's hard to use because you literally have to turn the focus ring less than a millimeter and you're fully out of focus. It's quite unbelievable. And of course, because there's no autofocus, there's nothing correcting you. So the only way I could check focus peaking didn't even work. I had to magnify the image just to see if it was in focus. That is the only way I could do it in the EVF. A massive advantage of EVFs being able to do that. On a bright sunny day, you're looking through the EVF and you can see what's in focus and what's out of focus. That to me is a really gorgeous, soft, creamy outcome, and I like what I'm seeing there when it comes to the background
and I like what I'm seeing there when it comes to sharpness. Definitely usable, definitely great images, just hard to use. And then here is close-up. We're looking at the top of a pen here, and that yellow top is somewhere in the order of 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. So this gives you an idea of how close you can get. 1 centimeter is less than half an inch. I think we're very close to 2 times magnification here. The same here with this drill bit, and this was actually at 2.8. And I think that's looking quite amazing. We get into 100%, and we're actually seeing the grains there in the metal. Now, I just want to let you know, this is the first time I've ever photographed 2 times macro. I think ever. Like I said earlier, this is not my field of expertise. To my eyes, you look where it's in focus, and it's just this very thin band here. But yeah, that's in focus. That's sharp. 2.8. Same again, same again. Now, what I was doing here was, because I didn't have a lot of light, well, I did have a lot of light, but we were at f22. So this is my phone, and you can see the time on the phone there. And I was writing that down so I knew the f-stop of the shot, because there's no way to record metadata. This was a way to record metadata. Now, this is a 4-second shot. Now, the floor that I'm on is wooden. I had a 2-second delay. I hope I didn't move, but critical focus is that hard, and any amount of movement is that impacting, and it's 4 seconds, or is this diffraction? Now, I don't have time to do more testing for this video, considering the other images at 1/4 of a second are sharp, very sharp. There is a huge difference between 1/4 of a second and 4 seconds. And yes, we can see my Z7's sensor needs a clean. This doesn't feel like camera shake to me. It doesn't. It might be. I think it might be diffraction. I think we might be actually seeing it here, and f22 makes absolute sense. We are deep into diffraction for any camera over 45 megapixels at this point in time. Now again, it's just a bit more landscape, 100%. Extremely difficult to pull focus. It required magnification of the image in the EVF, because this was a glary day. Interestingly, I was first shooting it and going, yeah, oh, it's in focus. I was just eyeballing it without magnifying. Then I would play the image back and it's like, oh, it's out of focus. To use this lens in the field and get it sharp, which this is, pixel for pixel we are here, you have to magnify. There's just no other way of ensuring you're getting critical focus. Otherwise, it's really sharp, and we can see here that it's really sharp. This is at f8. This lens can absolutely be used for landscape, but you have to be on top of your field craft. You can't shoot quickly. You've got to take your time, and it really probably pays to double check that you nailed the focus, because not only is it really hard to get focus, but even if you get focus and you just ever so slightly nudge the focus ring, it's out. It just has to move kind of almost a few atoms and you're out. You basically can't touch it. You can't move it at all, or you're out. That's how quick it is when you're up near the infinity end of this lens. But as you can see here, you can still get results, so you've just got to put the work in. Now, whilst I was out on my bike on this day, we got this enormous storm came through and almost knocked me off my bike. And as I rode along the foreshore here, I discovered 3 little shipwrecked boats that obviously had just been pushed into shore. And I've ridden along here, I can't tell you, 1,000, 2,000 times. I've never seen this before. Abandoned boats, and later on, I found that the boats were actually being rescued. This is at f8 again, and we can see the foreground is absolutely in focus and the background is soft. I like what we're seeing here. This is 100% pixel for pixel. This is obviously done by hand, done by eye, and a lovely result. And I actually really like how that's rendering the background. We've got the sun shining now. We can see it in the waves here, the sparkle in the waves. I see no sign of purple fringing, and I don't think I've seen any sign of purple fringing from this lens at all at any time. Let me know if you can see it and if I missed it. Another thing I really like about this lens is its character. I do think it has a lovely, really sort of analog, natural feel to it, which is unusual in this day and age. So it's actually quite advantageous. And I could actually see this being used as a cine lens just because of that look. And just another look at what the bokeh looks like. This wall was probably something like 1 meter from me. This is a pebble, probably something around 1 centimeter wide. Just to give you this black one at the top here, that's about how big it is. And surprising to me, I've never looked closely at Seaweed. Here is the Seaweed shot, not in macro. I'm standing up, and that thing there is probably something like 1 foot wide. And then here we are getting super duper close up to it, and I just love the grains of sand and the detail that we can see here. Basically near on 2x magnification at this point in time. And yes, I know my sensor needs a clean, but we can get an idea of how sharp and how good this is looking. And again, we have full sunlight here. This was f8, really quite beautiful. And the other thing I wanted to show you here is these images have not been adjusted very much. I've just brought up the shadows a bit, but I have not added any further sharpening to any of the images that you have seen. But of course, Capture One might do a little bit of that. I think the Seaweed looks really cool, and yeah, we're looking at grains of sand there. Pretty amazing. Couldn't quite get to macro, but I see no sign of purple fringing. High contrast situation, very, very sharp when you nail it. And then there's that light close up, cobwebs, everything. You know, I'm actually impressed by what I see here. Pixel peeping this lens on the Z7. This might not be quite macro just because I wasn't tall enough. This alien thing might be around about 10 inches or a foot, 25, 30 centimeters. We can actually see the paint and the bubbling paint. Probably not quite at macro, close to macro, but it just gives you a sense of the sharpness and the fidelity. And I'm impressed. Pixel peeping these images shows the quality of this lens. I do think it delivers a high quality image, but your field craft needs to be strong to use this lens. It comes highly recommended from my perspective. Considering its price, you just have to be prepared to go fully manual and do all the things that are required to shoot macro, which is hard. My hat's off to all amazing macro photographers.
Minimum focus is 0.3 of a meter. It has 13 aperture blades, 14 elements in 9 groups, and the f-stops are 2.8 to f22. The lens deploys 4 low dispersion ED lenses, 3 high refractive index lenses, designed for gains in sharpness, resolution, and portability. Declicked aperture, all metal lens body, and the lens is about 15.7 by 8 centimeters in size. Okay, this lens comes for E mount, Z mount, RF mount, EF mount, and L mount. Pergear, they are getting everywhere. Now the lens is an all metal construction, so it comes in at 790 grams. Now this lens is normally $319 US, but right now it's on sale for $287 US. It's super affordable if you want to give macro a go. To the best of my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, as photo sites get smaller, we start to see the impacts of diffraction sooner, as in, you know, like F6, F7, F8, instead of, say, F9, F10, and F11. And that seems to be the difference between 60 megapixels and, say, 45 megapixels. The exact numbers, I'm not going to quote, because it does seem to be a moving target. And there is such complexity when it comes to sensor design, or you might call it the characteristics of the sensor, that these things can vary between manufacturers, I'm sure. And I just wanted to talk about the fact that I was shooting here on my trusty studio. This ancient, can you see the handle? There it is. I bought it from another photographer who was closing his business in like 2008. And this is great for macro because you've got this handle and you can just do really small increments. And I've almost never had any usage for this tripod, and this is the perfect usage. It's been sitting here in my warehouse for 6 or 7 years. I'm so excited to get it out. The other advantage of a tripod like this, not only can you crank the height, great, like a Hollywood cinema camera, but it's really heavy, which is great because you don't want to move. I would say in most circumstances, using this lens between, say, f5.6 and f11 on your Z cameras, your high megapixel Z cameras, that's going to be the sweet spot of this lens. So ultimately, what do I think of this lens? Well, 2x magnification is a lot. Macro photography is very specific. It's very detailed. It's very precise. It is a slower type of photography in the sense of you need to take your time to make it all happen. Most of the time, not all of the time. In that case, this lens seems fit for purpose, and unlike a lot of other lenses, I wouldn't specifically be using it for other things. You could, it's just harder than the lenses that we're used to. What's the quality like? Well, you are getting very close to objects, and the outcomes, well, it's a lot of fun. But you're not going to be expecting Nikon Z S-Class outcomes with a lens that is something like a third or a quarter of the cost. You just have to decide whether you want to dabble in macro photography, and thus this is maybe a great place to jump off at. Or maybe you know you want to take it super seriously, and thus you might get a lens, for example, that has VR in it, like the Nikon one does, has autofocus, has all the EXIF data, so you're recording everything on your files as opposed to having to do it in a notepad. All of those things might be worth the extra money, or this might be perfect for you. What we have here is choice. You can go for the premium Z Nikon, or you can go for the Pergear, and your wallet will be much happier. That's up to you. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this lens or your experience in macro photography. What do you love photographing? And any suggestions of what I could perhaps photograph as a novice macro photographer. All right. As usual, it's been so good to see you. And if this is your first time here, I would love to see you again. So please do subscribe, please share, and please like. All right. Bye for now.